So we'll kick off with this great picture here. And this is the Toru apartments. This is actually 3 apartment buildings, and we've just housed 42 households into the first building. The next 2 buildings haven't been built yet, but it's quite a unique concept for Queenstown in that it's high density residential. We have a lot of high density managed apartments, but not a lot of residential. So it's something that we're really supportive of in the district, going up rather than out. This is obviously what we're all about, committed residents of the district. So here we go. We've been going for 4 years. We have that number actually 6 trustees, and it's probably closer to 2 full-time staff now. I've just managed to get the 2 girls that work with me to increase their hours. We have this really close relationship with council, and as a result of that we have 3 councillor liaisons who they're councillors, and they come to our board meetings and they participate and engage with us. They don't have voting rights, but they're actively engaged with us, and then they go back and they advocate to the rest of council on our behalf. And I'll get to the importance of that in a minute, but it's all around inclusionary zoning, which is our key source of funding. So having that really strong, close relationship with council is incredibly important for us. We were actually initiated there, you can see, out of council. So council created us, but as an independent housing trust rather than council controlled, and that meant we could access the inclusionary zoning that they were going to provide, but also government funding, which we've done over the years. So we've helped over 200 households, and we have a decent amount of net assets sitting there as a result of particularly inclusionary zoning. And this is where we sit. I mean, I'm sure you're all quite familiar with the housing continuum. There's not a lot of emergency and transitional housing in our district. I know Emerge has a contract to manage it from Invercargill, but there's really none in our district at all. It's quite a strange sort of thing. Often people will get shipped, they'll either get put in hotels for a night, or they might get shipped a couple of hours away to Gore or something like that. But public housing, we're in this space. We have probably 3 times as much public housing as Aotearoa. So we have the contract with HUD, and we're taking people off their waiting list and into housing. We do affordable rental. So for those who don't qualify for public housing, but still need some form of support, we will assist them with affordable rentals. Then we have a rent to buy program, which is a 5-year program where they pay, it's market rent, but it's at the very lower quartile of market rent. And then after 5 years, I've committed to a savings. Well, they've actually got a decent whack of savings there, and we match that dollar for dollar, and that helps them move into our next program, which is our secure home program. That's assisted ownership, and we'll talk about a bit more about that in a while. We did used to run a shared ownership program, which, as you can see, 124 households we helped that way. That is just shared ownership didn't work for us. It did initially for 10 years very successfully, but it doesn't anymore, and we moved away from it a couple of years ago. We've still got a few legacy households who are slowly vacating through natural attrition, but it's not something we offer anymore. We've a few rent to buy, plenty of senior housing, that number's starting to grow. Assisted ownership under our leasehold model, secure home. That affordable rental includes the public housing as well, and that's where we are today with 714 households on our waiting list. And they're about 20% of those are Wanaka based and 80% are Queenstown based. And here's a really quick snapshot of those 714. So a decent number of them now are singles and also couples, but the bulk of them, as you can see, are people, families with children. And then those senior numbers are starting to grow, and only a small percentage identify as Māori Pacific. Now this is the great picture that everyone loves, because this shows where we've got our funding from for the last 14 years. So QLCHT, that's our Queenstown Lakes District Council, that we get a $50,000 operating grant from them each year, but we've also received a large tract of land worth about $1 million, probably about 6 years ago, and we're set to receive another one soon. In the past, we've received close to 5 million of Crown grants. The Crown hasn't offered grants as such for a number of years, so they're off the table for now. But here you can see over 24 million in inclusionary zoning. So that comes either in the form of land or cash from developers. And I will talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but you can see that without this, we would not have been able to have the success we've had as a trust. It's been huge, and it's enabled us to leverage to get these Crown grants, to get the land from council. This is just a little bit of a spiel pitch about who we are. So obviously we're engaged with Community Housing Aotearoa. We're registered with the regulatory authority, which is an important aspect of our structure. We are recognised as being a bit of a leader and innovator in the sector, and we do partner a lot with local social services to make sure that our households and people on our waiting list have those wraparound support services that a lot of them needs. And then obviously, as I mentioned before, we contract to HUD to deliver public housing. I've gone too fast. Here we go. The evolution of shared ownership. So it worked really well for us when entry-level prices were about 500,000, and typically a household would come along and they could afford 70%, so they'd get 350 through their own mortgage and deposit. We would chip in with 150,000, we'd own 30%, and over time they'd buy us out. It was a nice model. In about 2016, entry-level prices suddenly jumped to around 750, but a typical household on our waiting list could still only afford around 350 themselves through their mortgage and deposit. So it just meant that we would have had to put in far too much ourselves. There's a couple other reasons. There was some negative stakeholder reactions to households making large windfall gains. And so those stakeholders in particular were the developers who gave us the land. So they're pretty reluctant to hand over land or cash anyway to a trust at nil cost. But if they do, they want to know that it's being spread amongst as many families as possible, not just enabling a few lucky households to make those big windfall gains, which a few of them who bought from us off the plans in 2015 moved into their house 12 months later, and they'd made $200,000 in capital gain in that time. And look, that's great for them, but wow, that is money that we could have been spreading across hundreds more households. So that was one big reason that we've moved away from it. And council saw that as well, and they weren't happy with the lucky households making big capital gains. Obviously as well, it's a passive investment for us. So we put that 30% in, or whatever that percentage is, and we get no return on it. They pay $400 a year to belong to the program, which barely covers the administrative costs. And then we get the capital uplift of our share at the end of it, but we get nothing else. And if they're in there for 10 years, that's, a very low return on our money. We still think it's a good program for employers, perhaps, or parents, and we're happy to share our IP, but it's not something we offer anymore. So we came up with a new model a couple of years ago, and it's based on a leasehold model. It's actually based on what they were doing over in Whistler, and we called it the Secure Home Program. And how it works, and it is similar in a lot of ways to a community land trust. We don't call ourselves a community land trust, but this program operates like one for all intents and purposes. So we own the land, and then the household buys the right to occupy the property with their mortgage and deposit. We try to steer away from that language, typically the right to occupy, because in New Zealand, it has quite negative connotations, I think, particularly around retirement villages. So we say they buy the lease to the property. Sometimes when we were first explaining, we're saying you're actually buying the improvements, because you're buying in at the cost us to build the improvements. We've taken the land out of the equation in terms of their purchase price. There's no margin, it's just the cost to construct. And then they pay a ground rent on the land, which is set at 1.5% of land value. So here you can see it's about $100 a week for a $350,000 section. Then we retain the freehold title, which we can use as security ourselves, and the bank has security against a leasehold title, which we've created. Now, some of the key elements of this program is that it's a 100-year lease with ground rent ties in with CPI. So whatever inflation's doing, that's what their ground rent is going to be doing. So they could stay there in theory for 100 years and their ground rent's only ever going to go up with CPI. They want to sell, they have to sell back to us. They don't get to sell on the open market. They sell back to us. And again, that resale price is set with CPI. So whatever inflation has been for the period they've been in the property, that's what they're selling back to us at. And then we on sell to the new household at that same price. We encourage them to make improvements. So we want them, it's their home, we want them to make improvements. And then if we approve those improvements, then that can be added into their resale price. So they shouldn't be penalised. We want them to it to be a carrot rather than a stick for improvements. At the moment, the bank requires households to have 20% deposit. So that's 20%, not obviously of the market value of the property, but of the purchase price that they're buying in at. Unless they qualify for the first home loan, which is the government's underwrite scheme, and the 5% deposit. And a lot of our households, because they're on that sort of income cap, they do qualify for that. And of course, a lot of them now are pulling in their KiwiSaver and Homestart. So here's a nice little example. So this is a house that we're building down in a subdivision of Queenstown at the moment, and it's going to cost $380,000 to build. Now that's total turnkey. So that's your landscaping, your drapes, carpets, the works. So this household in this situation has a 20% deposit. They have $38,342 mortgage. Now on a weekly basis, they're going to be paying $354 a mortgage. Let's say rates, insurance and maintenance, which is all part of their obligations as the homeowner. Let's say that's $100 a week, and then ground rent, let's say it's another $100. So we're looking at a total of $555 a week. Now, if they were to go and rent that property in the open rental market, they're looking at least $650 a week. So $650 versus $555, it really is a no-brainer. That $650 has come back as well significantly. So before COVID, entry-level rental prices started at a minimum of $750. Sometimes they were getting up to $1,000, $1,200. It was absolutely insane. But after COVID, obviously, a lot of properties that were being used for Airbnb came back on the long-term rental property market, and rents have dropped back significantly. But even so, it's still, you can see you're still in a better position to be in this leasehold program with us rather than renting. And at the same time, you're paying off your mortgage. You've got that security of tenure, 100-year lease. You know what your outgoings are going to be as long as you're in the program, essentially. So we have this little catch cry. We say it's a nest, not a nest egg, because we're not giving people the ability to make the large capital gains. That's not what this program is about. It's about giving them affordability and long-term security. So, and another key component, obviously, is that the house does remain in community ownership through the trust in perpetuity. And that was one of the big stakeholder desires, if you like. So basic criteria, I think most CHIPs around the country have this sorts of criteria. You have to be a New Zealand resident. So this is 714 households on our waiting list. They qualify for all these. So they're at least one person has New Zealand residency, full-time employment. We waive that for senior housing, obviously, and there's other circumstances we can waive that if a house, there's a genuine reason they don't work. But typically we were set up to help key workers. Initially it was key workers in the district, so that's always one of our core focuses. And then there's obviously an income cap and asset test. And here's what our future, we've set this big hairy audacious goal of 1,000 homes by 2028. Currently I have a little graph that I present to the board each month, and I think we set that goal in 2018 and we're at about 60 now. So we've got a wee way to go, but you have to have those big goals sometimes. We think that as we continue to roll out our developments, about 65% of the properties that we develop will be in the secure home model and 35% will be rentals. And we do expect an increase in senior rental demand as that demographic grows. Inclusionary zoning. So there's a lot of chat about this around the country at the moment, which is great. We are probably the only council / housing trust, but it's really a council who is doing it at any sort of decent level in the country in New Zealand. It's really quite big in London and parts of the UK and parts of the US, and really it's all about value uplift that's created through the rezoning of land. So let's say land is zoned as rural and all you can do is farm on it. And then the landowners or developers go to council and they say, hey, we want you to rezone this land to residential. And council says, well, if we do that, it's going to create huge uplift in value simply by rezoning it. So if we do that for you, what are you going to do back for the community? Here's what you're going to do. 5% of your sections that you're creating can come across to the Housing Trust for the purposes of affordable housing. That is putting it very simplistically, obviously. Probably many planners would say I've just butchered it, but I like to keep it pretty simple. And that can come across to the trust as land or as cash. It just depends on typically what the developer wants. So sometimes an example is Jack's Point. It was a high-end subdivision. They were one of the first ones to go through. They didn't actually want affordable housing down there. We couldn't build it with all their covenants like copper spouting and cedar cladding. So we were happy to take cash. They were happy to give us cash, and we bought a big chunk of land in an affordable subdivision and built there. But that's the basic premise of inclusionary zoning, and it varies dramatically wherever you go in the world. I think we've got quite a unique model here in the Queenstown Lakes. Some of the stuff that you'll see overseas is more around just ensuring a developer, when they develop, that a percentage of the homes are capped at an affordable price. It's not necessarily that they have to come across to a housing trust at no consideration. So I think we're in quite a fortunate position there. And this is our pipeline. This is basically my work plan for the next 5 years. So at the moment, we're building 13 down in Lake Hayes Estate. And then we've got, this is our Tiwa Banks project. This is land that we're receiving in Aotearoa from council at nil cost. It's a 3.6 hectare site. Well, they're selling it to us for $1 actually. So we've got our resource consent lodged at the moment. We're actually going back out with an RFP to try and get it reviewed with a sustainability focus. We want to see if we can reduce the carbon footprint there before we finalise a master plan. So that's something we're working on at the moment. 9 over in Arthur's Point, 60 out of a 600 lot, so that's 10%, and this is a special housing area, and the developer has to give us 10% of the sections at no cost, so it's a 600 lot section subdivision. These are ones in much older stakeholder deeds. These 60 in Hawea, which is, I don't know if some of you may be familiar with it, but it's I guess you call it, it's about 15 minutes from Wanaka. And the developer there has to give us 12.5%, which is a huge amount of his sections, but that was the final deal before the government approved it under the special housing area. So lots going on, but also not close to our 1,000 homes. I think we can count about 300 that we can see coming in the pipeline. So we're always looking for opportunities to do something outside just our inclusionary zoning pipeline, and that's what those Toro apartments at the start were about, and I can talk about more of them in a minute. This is our very first development with the land the cash that we received from Jack's Point, and we bought this piece of land and built 27 homes. We sold in the middle of it was a commercially zoned piece, so we sold that. And they've developed it into a nice little cafe, restaurant, bar. And there's over in the corner here as well, we sold a couple of sections and they built a childcare centre. So it's a really nice mixed tenure development down there now. Piece of land that council gave us. The Crown chipped in at the time with $1 million, and we have there's encumbrance on the land saying it can never be sold. It has to be retained as rentals in perpetuity. So that works out well. Shotover Country. This was an interesting one. At the time, it was probably about 2012, and the market was pretty slow. And the deal was we would receive 26 titled sections from the developer, but because the market was slow, we anticipated that they'll be drip fed to us over the next 5 years. A couple here, a couple there, every 6 months or so. So we negotiated with the developer to take a piece of raw land, which was the equivalent value of 26 title sections, and build 44 homes out of that. And that's enabled us to get more out of it and do a comprehensive development, which is what we're all about, rather than piecemeal. We can get more bang for our buck, if you like. Wanaka, we've got some over here from developer, more from a developer in Wanaka. This is Cherwell Lane in Shotover Country, where we launched our secure home program in 2019. So it's these 6 along here. That was just after we'd completed, obviously, so there's not too much landscaping going on in the back there. And then the Toro apartments. So these front ones here aren't actually built yet, but they look very similar to what's back in here. The developer is Newground Living, which some of you may or may not know, their parent company, Newground Capital, and they built in their first block, they built 78 homes. And we're very supportive of this, as I said, this high density residential. So we agreed to buy 50 of them at a slight discount to market because of the bulk purchase. And that enabled the developer to get the financing to actually build the apartments. And then we sold 8 on the open market to make the finances stack up for ourselves. We put 16 into rentals and 26 into our secure home program. And those households, those under secure home, we sold because it was more challenging in terms of defining the land value and the cost of construction. So we did a bit of modelling to make sure that it was going to work for the households. And what we ended up doing was selling them at 50% of the our purchase price from the developer. So the average 1-bedder purchaser was buying in at 220,000 into a 1-bed unit, and the average 2-bedder was 320. And then their ground rent was set at 1% of the other 50% of the purchase price, if that makes sense. So they've ended up with really, really low outgoings. It's been phenomenal. Some of them are paying $200-300 a week in mortgage repayments, body corp rates, maintenance, etc., just because their purchase price was so low to start. So they're stoked. It has been a new concept for a lot of people living in apartments in Queenstown. So there's a bit of settling in going on at the moment, but in general, I think they're absolutely over the moon to have a lot of people have their own space at last, not be flatting. Some of them are, small single parents with 1 kid and have been in a boarding or flatting situation. So they're just grateful to have their own space with their children and clean, warm, highly insulated. Their outgoings are going to be so low going forward. So yeah, that was just completed and settled in May, so not long ago. And that's about it, really. That's I'll stop sharing now and stop the presentation and take questions.
That's amazing.
Thanks, Priya.
I have a question for you, Julie. When the next purchaser buys after the first residents have moved out, and because an asset usually depreciates and the land appreciates in a normal sale and purchase scenario, so the value uplift is in the land, how do you value the property? Is it just for the second purchaser? Is it the whole property, or is it just the asset on top?
Yeah, we don't actually, so we will revalue the land component, and then we set the new household has a new 100-year lease at 1.5% of the ground rent of the land value, which is that new land value.
Yeah.
But the purchase price that they're buying in it is what we've just bought it back from the other previous household for. So that improvements is not affected. It doesn't get revalued. It's just, if in that example, if they bought, I think we said 380, that the household's going to buy it, first household's going to buy it from us. If they sell it back to us in 5 years' time for 400,000, that's what we're on selling it to the next household for, 400,000.
Yeah, but that $400,000, is that because the whole value of the property, including the lease value of the lease, has gone up, or has the actual value of the house itself, the improvements, increased as opposed to depreciated?
Yeah, and that is a good question. And there's a bit of, there's a lot of people will say that improvements depreciate, but at the same time, the evidence that seems to be from leases in this type of model is that they don't depreciate, they hold their value. So, we will test it in the next few years as people sell, because we have to, with each time a household buys from us, they have to get a valuation of a lessee's interest, and that has to stack up in order for the bank to give them finance. So, that will be tested. And if the lessee's interest does start falling, that the value of those improvements, then we might have to rejig the model. But at this stage, that's the plan.
Okay, that's really interesting. Do you happen to have any, I can take this offline, but a reference to that, the evidence that that those leaseholds do hold their value? Because that's one of the key challenges we get when explaining this model to people and why it would be good. And people always rebut with, yeah, but the asset depreciates. And I'm like,
yeah, I'll
no,
have
but
to
it doesn't.
yeah, I know we looked into it. This must have been back in 2017 or 18 when we were initially crafting the program. And we did look at it, and particularly around that Whistler model. So I'll try and dig that out.
Amazing. Thanks, Julie.
Yeah.
Julie, I have a question. I was blown away. It's so good. So much information in there that is so useful for us right now. And I love the secure housing setup. And I guess one of the things we've been looking at, which is I think similar to what Greer's talking to, is that people buying in at a low rate, but then they're not selling at market rate. And then is there a perceived issue, or we perceive an issue, that people then aren't able to buy on the market? They can't leave the scheme, and they're kind of stuck in the scheme because they can't access full market rate prices. But I appreciate that they gain a little bit in mortgage and the deposit grows a little. But have you noticed that there's been an issue with that?
Well, we only launched the program really 2 years ago, so we haven't had the chance to see that yet. We do expect that it will take longer for households to transition. I think with shared ownership, we found that households typically, on average, every 5 years, they would be able to buy us out, and we don't expect that will happen with the Secure Home program. But at the same time, they've got a 100-year lease, so ultimately, it's not about necessarily providing them a pathway to independent home ownership, because we know some households may never ever get there. But if they have that 100-year lease, the ground rent only ever goes up with inflation. They pay off their mortgage. They could, in effect, pay off their mortgage in full and stay in that property with us and pay their 1.5% of ground rent on the land value, pay the rates of maintenance, and have that security of tenure and affordability for the rest of their life. And that's what the key program is about, rather than ensuring that they can move into the market. Because I think we've got to the stage now that we acknowledge that a lot of people never ever be able to get into the open market. So what are the options for those people long term?
Yeah, I'd also add to that, in like a lot of the research and literature from overseas examples, is that actually those households find that because they've got housing security, they improve, all other aspects of their life improve. So they're able to, and like the research actually shows, people are able to have the stability that enables their kids to like go to schools and not to worry about moving around, and then they get great job promotions. And then so there's all these other values that mean that eventually people can save more because they're paying such a low amount of ground rent and no mortgage, that eventually some of them can move into the market. But that I think what's really important is that we shouldn't necessarily encourage people that home ownership is the only way to build wealth, and so therefore that should be the end goal, because actually for many, like you say, Julie, it never will be, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's right. We have to let people know it's not the be all and end all to own your own home or not, but yeah, as long as you have that security and affordability, that can be enough.
I also had a comment about, you said the problem with the current model is that you're building houses and people are getting too much capital gains out of the shared equity thing. What we're trying to build in now, because we're aware that we're selling our houses at cost, but that if someone sold it in a year's time, it'd probably gain 100k or something, that we're going to perpetually put into the agreement, I guess, that when you sell your house, 10% of capital gains goes back to the trust to support affordable housing, so that every time a house is sold within the developments, the trust is getting a sort of a bit of cash to help support the maintenance of the common land, I guess, but also the affordable housing scheme.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we will talk about this more, I know, Simone, but to my mind, if you are enabling people to sell on the open market, albeit with, say, 10% of the profit coming back to the trust, then is it really a community land trust, or is it just
These are the developments that are built on the land that isn't on the trust. So these are the developments that are separate from that, but that can continuously support the trust because it kind of wraps around those developments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Julie, thank you for that presentation. It was fantastic and exciting to hear what you're doing. I'm in Nelson. I do notice that a lot of these sort of, well, there aren't a lot around, but hopefully increasingly, these programs, they seem to be more for 2 and 3 bedroom places, standalone, or, you know, for families. But there's such a growing demographic of singles now, you know, where obviously people are aging older in place, and also but a lot of younger people choosing to live alone or just are alone as circumstances. Are you doing much accommodating for smaller places, you know, 1 bedrooms or bed sits, that sort of thing?
And I'm glad you asked that question, because I should have mentioned it in my presentation. I mean, that is another key part of what the buying 50 apartments off the Toru developer was all about. They were all 1 and 2 bed apartments, because we would look at our waiting list and see that growing number, something like 200 singles and 125 couples, and say, we are not putting these people into 3-bedroom homes, but yet we're building 3-bedroom homes. So how are we supporting them? So that was another key reason that we bought the Toru units, and the bulk of people going into those units, I think there's only a couple that are actually literally two couples with 2 children, and the rest are either singles, couples, mostly singles and couples, and 1 or 2 single parent with 1 child. So yeah, that's type of stuff that we need to be, that we've obviously just done, and we need to be doing more of to make sure we're helping that end, and that can work for seniors as well. So we actually had, they didn't end up following through, but we had them approved, a couple of older ladies who were at 65 plus, basically weren't working anymore, so very lower income, yet had a decent size deposit available, say 300,000. So they had the ability to buy into the secure home program with just their cash deposit and not need a mortgage, and then they could just pay the ground rent. So there's opportunities like that, because for them it would be challenging to get into the market with, certainly in this district, with 300,000 wouldn't get you anything. You know, if you don't have an income, you can't get a mortgage, just that cash won't get you anything in this district. So yeah,
That's great to hear, because I do think that councils and developers are not keeping up with how the demographics are looking. You know, this is a growing sector, and still we're just building great big homes, you know, and so we get a few sort of community owned homes, but I'm thinking, God, probably for the same amount of money we could be, you know, putting a lot of single people into accommodation. So it's good that you're aware of it, and I hope we can see more of it. Thank you.
yeah, you're welcome.
I've got another question.
Julie needs to leave in about, I think, 1 minute. So yeah, maybe we could figure out another way that Julie can get our questions. But okay, let's have one more question so Julie can go.
I feel like I've asked lots of questions. If anyone else wants to ask one, I'm happy to meet up with Julie again.
Go for it, Simone.
Yeah, I think
Cool.
you need it, Simone. Go ahead.
I was really kind of inquiring, really. It's like the inclusionary zoning thing, that seems amazing for having got you to where you are now. But are you at a point where the income that you get from the sort of shared ownership and affordable rentals and things like that is actually enough to create more housing? Is there like a sustainable model within that, or is it constantly relying on this kind of offer from developers?
Yeah, that is a good question, and we do. So when we build any development now, and that's what we sort of 65%, maybe 70% secure home, and then the rest rentals, and we make sure that we structure enough equity that we get a positive cash flow out of that development and those rentals going forward, so that we are always building that cash flow. And we are at the stage now where, yeah, we function quite happily without, on an operational level, without inclusionary zoning, but to actually scale up at the pace that we want to and reach that 1,000 homes goal, then we do zoning. So we could operate nicely and just grow very, very slowly without it, but scale up at a decent rate when needed.
Great. Thank you.
And I think as Julie, I believe you said it, which is that they're getting a value uplift within the rezoning, which is sort of like a free, it's a free gift that they get. Their land is all of a sudden worth so much more because of the rezoning. So if any of you are in the network, Bernard Hickey has the When the Facts Change episode, which I sent along to the messenger and the WhatsApp group. And that specifically talks to the things that around that. We've got a lot of people who are getting sort of windfall with their doubling or tripling, what they had just before a zoning. And I think that's where we need to look at, if we're revolutionizing housing, I think this is a key point. The inclusionary zoning really is an equity or equality. It's a fairness thing, as well as it's looking at where we can take where people are getting almost something for nothing and actually redistributing it. So I think it's an important, inclusionary zoning is very important, I think, for the whole country to advocate for.
Yeah, we're doing a workshop with Community Housing Aotearoa next month, and our council, and we're going to have a bit of council going out to community consultation on what you're going in our district plan. It's quite a big deal for us, and so we're having a bit of a workshop, and we're doing it live and also a video link. So once we've firmed up those details, I'll send them to this group so people can get a bit more of a base understanding about what it's all about, and probably high level planning details than what I give you.
And just to mention as well, there actually is a site dedicated to inclusionary zoning. It's in America, there's an organization called Grounded Solutions, and then Grounded Solutions has a sort of a sister website on inclusionary zoning. So there you can get all it's America, but it still gives you lots of ideas about how they've done it and how it works and the various forms that it takes. And I think you also mentioned, Julie, which I think is very important for us to advocate for, which is government secured lending. So we don't really have that in America. There's Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae are the two government secured mortgage lending organizations. And that allows for where the banks don't want to take the risk, the government, does that. And I believe in your case, that is the case with those Crown grants, or am I right in that there was something like that as part of your program?
Yeah. It used to be called, oh, I can't remember what it used to be called. Now it's called the First Home Loan. And basically, yeah, it used to be only available to New Zealand owned banks, but now it's available to all banks. And the household pays a 1% premium fee on top of their mortgage, and it gets factored into their mortgage, so it's just part of it. So typically it might be an extra couple $1,000, and that enables them to have a minimum 5% deposit. And then the government, because it's at low, that's more of a risk to the bank, the government underwrites that risk to the bank. So it's been phenomenal for most
Who
of our
administers that, Julie?
Housing New Zealand. Housing New Zealand does.
Oh, Kāinga does.
Kāinga, sorry.
Yeah. So do you go to them directly and be like, is it?
But that you just go, it's all on the website. So you
Yeah.
would, they've got their own website on it. So you would, find out if you qualify, and then I think you just talk to your bank and put in an application, and you factor that in with the Home Start grant and your KiwiSaver. And a lot of households who thought they had no deposit at all because they had no cash in the bank suddenly realize that they've got 40,000 by the time they're 10,000 from Home Start, 20,000 KiwiSaver, and it's incredible. So yeah.
Well, that sounds very good, and I think that's a lot of people don't know about that. So maybe, Julie, I just need to get that. I haven't been taking notes while you're speaking, although I am recording it. Just that basic would be great for me to also send out to the group to let them know if they don't know that. That's, I think, a very valuable sort of supplement, I guess, to being able to work with banks.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. All right, I better run. Sorry, folks, but we'll see you next time, and feel free to send me any emails. If there's further questions, you could send them to me or via Zola, whatever works.
Can we get a copy of your presentation?
Yeah, I'll send that to Zola.
Great, thank you.
Okay, see you later. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Julie. Bye. Great.
Bye.
Well, I have somebody on a lawnmower, so I'm hoping you don't hear that. It's summertime where I am. So people are doing summertime things, cutting the lawn. Because if you don't know, I've had to come to America, so it's now towards the evening and summer. Complete opposite to the rest of you. So I did say I could keep this going for the next till 15 minutes after, just because I thought this might generate, some other questions, or if you wanted to, if there was anything that came out of your time together that you had when you were meeting up with each other, anything that you thought was really interesting that you wanted to share with the whole group, I would just give a bit more time to that. And also just to make the announcements. Can everyone hear me all right, or is that machine? Maybe I need to go inside. That machine might be a little bit, I'm afraid you might not be hearing me so well.
We can hear you.
Other people making so much noise around me, and sorry, and my aunt left the TV on. I'm in my aunt's house, so right. So what I was going to say is that from the Women Revolutionizing Housing, we came up with a lot of great recommendations. There was about 100 in all, because everybody there gave 3 recommendations, what we would tell our leaders that we wanted, what we want them to do. And I believe that's quite a powerful set of statements. And I am going to, it is collated, but it's in the form of the feedback. So it's all sort of with all the other questions, but I think it deserves to be a standalone document that anyone can use. I had Catherine asked for it, and I said, sure, but would anybody be willing to theme them together, sort of clump them? Because if somebody's reading 90 something points, recommendations, and they're reading the same thing over and over again, I thought maybe it needs just a little bit of work to make it really well
I can do that.
structured.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that.
Oh, Julie,
Yeah.
thanks. Yes, that's what I wanted, was a volunteer. Catherine said she could do it, but it was somewhere down the line. So if we could have it sooner than later, because, you know, there's lots of opportunities coming forward for us. We've got this, and Helen, thank you very much for sharing that link. There was the HUD, I think it's called GPS or something. I can't remember the name exactly, but anyway, the government's asking for submissions. I did originally give the link, but I'll give that link again. And what I thought we could do is, and I know as we did with the Housing Innovation Society, we formed a little policy subcommittee, and there were those of us who really cared to really make that policy, really easy to digest for those that we're asking. So there might want to be, from our bigger group, a subgroup that takes these policy recommendations, and then we move them. You know, we figure out what's the strategy. We could make one a template for the HUD submission. Maybe there's local council submissions. I don't know. There's probably lots of other ways that it could be moved to, go where it needs to go, to the people it needs to go to. So that's another kind of opportunity that we have to work in a, smaller little subgroup around policy. And then there were other things that came from the retreat as well, like the next steps forward. That was those World Cafe activities where we generated a lot of information. So at the moment, it's all just still sitting. Thank you for those of you, Bobby and Tracy's not here, who did all that writing it up, but we certainly don't want it to just sit on a piece of paper on a Google Doc. We want it to move. So we kind of need to figure out what are our next steps as a collective with what we have created, so that those become, tools or strategies, vehicles for us to move this revolution forward. Sorry, my aunt's just getting the phone.
I've kind of got a question that it might not be the right time, so just that's fine if it's not. It's just relating to the thing about the inclusionary zoning. Just in that, I think, I don't have an issue with that, but I think ideally, especially because some of us are like from Wellington or Auckland sort of areas, or Christchurch, or just cities, that more ideally than spreading out and using more land would be to intensify building where there's, transport and just that, that policy feedback that the government was asking for. They mentioned releasing more land, one of their questions. And I don't think it's necessarily the best way to do it. Like what's been done in Vancouver is they've really intensified without making it look like, very multi-story apartments. They've just intensified the villas and things by going up and under. So just putting that in.
And there's models like Bronwyn's, where it can be co-housing, it can be non-speculative, it can have communal spaces and activities. So that's why Bronwyn's project is really lovely, to see how it can still have that spaciousness, about it, and the intentionality about it. And then there's the affordability piece, how the Queenstown Lakes has bought specific units, that those are the affordable units within that more urban setting. So yeah, lots of different ways to mix and match the more densified ways to do it. So some people are having to leave. We're getting to the 15-minute mark after 10. I did want to read, Simone said that the Takaka co-housing development went public on Friday. She's put the link in the chat if you want to check out. That's fantastic. That has actually moved really quickly. I remember just when they were just considering that piece of land in around January of 2020. So it's really cool. In a year and a half, so much has gone on for them to be able to go public. So check out that link. I think really at this point, I guess my suggestion is that if there's anything that is you're feeling really energized about within this network collective, that you are welcome to be a champion for that particular thing, if it's policy or something else, that we're sort of, I guess, a holacracy where, you know, there's little circles of movement, you know, within the larger circle. So it's not like you need to come to me to, you know, for it to be I have to approve it, or it needs to be, you know, fully thought out. You can just, you know, throw your idea out there and see who, you know, gets attracted to work. Yeah, there's quite a lot that came out of that retreat to work with. So I'm just going to be playing the part that I can play, which is, you know, to be hosting the Common Ground, to be able to send out newsletters. And if you have any announcements to, there was that link where you can add your project and your details. And if you haven't gotten it, I'll put it in the next email so that we can at least all see who's doing what. That's really helpful. And then you can make connections using that grid if anybody's in your local area. So
Lola, what's the best way to stay in touch with everyone? Is it by email or on the Facebook, or what's the best way to do what you're suggesting?
There's two group chat channels, Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp. I'm in both because I don't know who's not in each one, so I just double post. Yeah, at the moment I don't have another method. I do have a Facebook page for Common Ground, but I haven't enabled that to be like a chatting space yet. So probably just use those two channels for now. If anybody has a great idea, then you know, bring it to me and we'll see how we can manage that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, open to
I have to go. I'm very sorry, but thank you so much, and I'll join again next time.
Thank you very much for coming, Martine. We're at the end of our time together, so thank you all very much for coming. It's lovely to see familiar faces, and for those who haven't come before, it's lovely to have you joining us. So please be in touch. You can always email or I don't know about calling me. I guess you could messenger call me if you wanted to chat. And if you want to book a time with me, you can do that through the website. So thank you all and have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Happy Saturday.
Bye. Bye.